Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for August 13th, 2021, according on 2:10 p.m. Eastern Time. A lot to talk about today, including the potential for yet another tropical storm to be impacting the Lesser Antilles and what Tropical Depression Fred will bring to the Florida Peninsula over the next several days. So let's go and jump straight into everything. Taking a wide look across the tropical Atlantic this afternoon, there is a lot going on right now. We are continuing to monitor Tropical Depression Fred, which is very disorganized this afternoon, and this was pretty much well expected. However, again, we will be watching for this to eventually sneak off of the western or the part of central Cuba here and then move through the Florida Straits, bringing tropical storm conditions to the Florida Keys, and then eventually moving up here, kind of paralleling the western coast here of the Florida Peninsula, and then newly designated potential tropical cyclone 7, which is located right here. And this too will be moving in the same general direction of where Fred just came from and could pass over the Antilles once again. So very tricky forecast setting up here for this particular storm and then what's left here of Fred, and yet another tropical wave that will be coming off here within the next couple of hours. And this too is gaining some model support, so we'll have to talk about that here in the next little while. So again, looking here at the forecast for Tropical Depression Fred, again, this was a tropical depression for the last couple of days now after coming off of Hispaniola. It did look pretty good last night and was near tropical storm status once again. But then the circulation actually kind of weakened and has now moved just a little bit inland over parts of Cuba. This is expected to reemerge and strengthen into a tropical storm once again. And here in the upper end here with 50 miles per hour forecasted by the National Hurricane Center. And as for potential tropical cyclone 7, we can see here once again that this is now being designated as potential tropical cyclone. This will likely get upgraded to a tropical depression or storm later tonight. Officially forecast to become a depression within the next 12 hours and a storm within the next 24 hours. So by tomorrow morning, we will likely have a storm in here. And again, this is much of the same track as we saw with Fred, where this is expected to pass, again, through the Caribbean and near or over the Antilles, near or over Cuba, and then end up and wind up here in the Bahamas and just off the southeastern tip of Florida, once again, within the next 5 days or so. So by next week, we could be looking at a storm of some magnitude here in the Bahamas. But again, a lot depends on the intensity of what happens here. We could see a track as far south here into the southern Caribbean, or we could see a track that goes a little bit further towards the north here and ends up missing the islands, in which case we may have a stronger situation to deal with down the road for the portions of the Bahamas. So let's go and jump straight into taking a look at the variables here. We'll start a look here at Fred, again, kind of working from west to east. Again, we noticed that Tropical Depression Fred is not very well organized. Most of the convection this afternoon is kind of inland convection. We can kind of notice that it is kind of riding this outflow boundary, which means, again, we don't have storms that are converging into the circulation at the moment. We have storms that are kind of flowing outwards, and we have strong shear that is coming out from the southwest blowing to the northeast. So we have, again, the shear blowing these cirrus outflow clouds back into the screen here. And again, this is kind of one of the things, the very disorganized system. It is potentially even an open wave at this point. We may not even have a closed low-level circulation. Again, we can kind of tell that there is some sort of circulation here. Whether or not this is closed, though, really, again, kind of depends. We don't really see anything here that really screams that this is closed at the moment. And the circulation could very well now be embedded well within the landmass of Cuba. At that point, again, not much is to be expected of Fred. However, we will be watching kind of the northern part of this wave. Again, we can kind of tell that there is still a pretty elongated wave axis in through here. Again, kind of extended from southwest to kind of northeast like this. And it's this northern part of the wave envelope near Andrews Island right now that we could see yet another circulation attempt to develop out in this region and track more towards kind of the northwest like this. And if it does so, we would expect maybe some more gradual impacts for portions of the Florida Keys and the southern Florida Peninsula, as at that point it would be a lot closer to land than, let's just say, a track something like this. So we'll be watching very closely. Again, this is still a very loosely defined system, very elongated, but we'll be watching this northern part of the wave now near Andrews Island to see how this indeed involves. We can already tell that based on the visible satellite, there is some evident circulation in this region, albeit though it's not really wrapping around to suggest that a low level center is forming up here in this region. So we'll be watching for it, but again, it's not really something that in particular is really a high end chance right now. Again, either way, we should be looking at a storm that tracks into this region and doesn't really do much. If we look here at the GFS forecast, this is the 12Z run, valid for 2 p.m. this afternoon in the 850 millibar vorticity map. Again, what we're kind of looking at here, this is Fred over here. And again, the large steering kind of flow right now, we got this ridge over here, centered over Bermuda, basically, kind of forcing this basically due westward at this point, kind of towards the west-northwest. And this kind of general motion will continue for the next several days. Eventually, though, you can see here on the GFS, we get this northern part of the wave envelope at this point, because this is not a closed circulation by any stretch of the imagination by tomorrow morning. But the northern part of the wave envelope that's near Andrews Island right now ends up kind of consolidating near the west coast of Florida. And you can see that this would obviously bring some showers and thunderstorms to the region. If we look here at the 200 millibar wind flow in the middle part of the atmosphere, or the upper part of the atmosphere, we can tell that once again, based on this position on the GFS forecast, our storm would be somewhere right about here on Sunday afternoon. We have an anticyclone that is over South Florida. So if we had a storm that was over South Florida at this time down here, we would actually have a pretty favorable environment for intensification. But our storm is actually caught up on the northern end of that, associated with also a jet interaction, kind of this trough interaction. And because of that, we're getting a large amount of shear that's being pumped out from the south, kind of going to the north. And this kind of really limits the amount of intensification we could see. If you look here at the relative humidity in the middle part of the atmosphere, again, the GFS indicates that we could have a storm somewhere in this region on Sunday afternoon, but a large swath of this dark green moisture here is really on the eastern side of that, and almost kind of this comma head structure where we would get, again, a lot of heavy rainfall on the east side of this. So the Florida Peninsula, once again, could see some pretty heavy rainfall amounts. Upwards of 6 inches of rain is not out of the question for portions of South Florida. And you're kind of looking more so about anywhere from about 2 to 5 inches the further north you get, and the further east you get away from the circulation. But again, most of this will be on the eastern side here, and again, kind of on the eastern and northern side with that shear. If you look here at the total accumulated precip, just kind of going out to about Monday afternoon, we notice that rainfall amounts for the Florida Peninsula, according to the GFS here, anywhere between about really anywhere from about 1.5 to about 3 inches, with the southern Florida Peninsula and the west coast getting potentially as much as 5 inches along the eastern side here of the track of wherever this circulation ends up going. And again, the further east we get with this circulation, if this was to come to fruition, again, we would see a larger amount of rainfall on the eastern side of this. But again, the main threats are from this is going to be, again, some gusty winds, squally conditions, but the main primary threat will be that flooding rainfall and the potential for a few tornadoes, especially in the right side of that right front quadrant as it's passing by to the east. The Florida Peninsula could even be in a slight risk for severe weather tomorrow and Sunday. Again, those 2 days right now, days 2 and 3, are still marginal risk, but those could very well be upgraded to a slight risk if conditions warrant. So for now, again, Fred really not expected to do much, but it is expected to at least somewhat re-intensify into a tropical storm by tomorrow afternoon or evening, and then pass along the western coast here of the Florida Peninsula. And again, this could bring some pretty substantial rainfall amounts to portions of the southern Florida Peninsula in the west coast. Again, landfall expected here sometime within the next about 2 or 3 days as this moves up closer towards really about like Walton County, etc. So we'll be watching for impacts there. But again, the impacts will be felt mostly on the eastern side of that circulation. Now, jumping forward here, we'll take a look here at 95L, which is now being called Potential Tropical Cyclone 7 by the National Hurricane Center. We can see that today we've had more deep convection associated with this particular wave, and it is still a wave axis based on what we looked at from the earlier scatterometer pass, but we can tell that we've had a little bit more in the way of deep convective activity today. We do still have some pretty strong easterly shear blowing these cloud tops kind of away in the eastern side of the circulation is exposed here. The eastern side of the circulation is exposed, but this is still doing very well. And in fact, the circulation may very well be embedded within this region now. It's still probably elongated. Now, if we look here to the water vapor imagery, we can tell that there's a couple of important things going on today compared to what we had yesterday. Again, we have more in the way of convection, and there is some outflow now starting to expand on the northern side of this. This, by the way, is the islands right here, in which we have a tropical storm watch for portions of the Windward Islands through here. But again, we have some decent outflow now starting to expand here on the northern side. We also notice that there's still some pretty strong shear, these upper level kind of cirrus clouds that are racing in towards the screen here, racing towards our storm here. Again, this kind of indicates that we still have some pretty potent shear, and notice all this kind of black contrast here. This is dry, stable air in the middle part of the atmosphere, which is also racing towards our storm at this point. We can kind of tell that this dry air is now starting to kind of get on the fringes of our storm, and we could see that being trained from time to time. Now, the shear will begin to lighten here over the next few days, and for that, we can look here at the GFS forecast. Again, the 12Z run value for 2 p.m. this afternoon. Now, in the short term, the GFS has corrected towards a much stronger low-level vortex, and we remember over the last several days that this was not a very coherent structure in the GFS, and in fact, we can kind of go back and look at the GFS forecast, and we can take a look here from the 18Z run of yesterday. We noticed that, again, it was very ill-defined as a sharp wave axis. Now it's sort of corrected towards a stronger low-level vortex that is more so closed off. Now we can look here in the middle part of the atmosphere at the relative humidity. We can see all this dry, stable air around, and that's kind of what we're seeing again on the water vapor imagery. All this very dry, stable air to the north of here, which is also racing eastward because of shear. Now, as we progress, and we'll look here at the 200 millibar wind flow to kind of see this progression, but as we progress through the next several days, what's going to end up happening is we'll be getting a switch in the wind shear direction. We'll be getting to lose a lot of the easterly shear, and instead we're going to have this upper level TUT, tropical upper tropospheric trough, that ends up developing and creating shear downstream, or kind of upstream of our system rather. And this is going to switch the wind direction, and this actually creates an upper level ridge that's set up downstream here, kind of around our storm environment at the time. So if our storm is indeed positioned in this environment, which we can look at here on the 850 vorticity, our storm at this time would be positioned mainly over the islands at this point. And again, looking at the 200 millibar wind, we have some pretty favorable upper level conditions here around the island. However, again, this is also by 42 hours. This is on Sunday, and this is also now starting to coincide when we're getting this ridge to set up across portions of the Florida Straits and Cuba. We also have this TUT that's dipping in here and creating the shear. So we're really going to have kind of a tough time here dealing with a weak storm if it really wants to survive. It's going to need to be stronger than this. And again, we can kind of see that eventually what ends up happening is we get kind of this pinching off where this TUT becomes pinched in between, again, the two streams here, this kind of upper level ridge here and this anticyclone here, and we kind of have this TUT in between here. And so there's a window in a corridor where the shear is actually very well maximized in through here of over 30 knots. And this would be very unsupportive for tropical cyclone genesis and maintenance. Now, the caveat with this, and we can jump back to the 850 vorticity map here, the caveat to this, and again on the GFS, is that this goes over the islands. Caveat here being, if this is a stronger storm, because this will have about 12 to 18 hours where the shear is virtually zero, And if that does become the case and our storm is able to take advantage of it, it may be able to slip north of the islands as a slightly more coherent tropical cyclone. If it does so and can produce enough upper level ridging and have its own anticyclone, it may be able to force the tut and kind of shove it out of the way. And we can kind of see that if the storm is stronger here, this again would just kind of shove this and back it towards kind of the northwest. And we might then have a stronger storm to deal with towards the Bahamas or wherever it ends up going within the next about 5 days or so. But if it stays weaker and if it's not managing pretty well, it will eventually run into the islands here and probably, as we saw with Fred, pretty much just dissipate over the islands. And that's kind of one of the probabilities that we've been seeing today. Now, if you look here at the ensembles from the GFS and we look here at the mean sea level pressure ensembles here, what we can tell, if we zoom in to the Western Atlantic, we can tell that, again, we have a pretty big difference in where we could see a storm in here. Again, we will kind of go out here to about 96 hours from now. This is 12Z on Tuesday or 8 a.m. Tuesday morning. Again, we can kind of see where we could see a potential storm. And anywhere within here, we could see a storm that's enveloped in here. So again, we could see a storm that passes over the islands, which right now seems like the more probable thing that this would pass over the islands as a weaker storm in through here. But we are starting to see some ensemble support continue to increase in the last couple of model runs, and it's been consistent, but it has increased where we've seen model support increase on a track that is more towards kind of the northwest like this and stays away from the islands. Now, again, if this does so, we have a stronger vortex in here and a storm that is more able to fend off shear, again, because it's not being impacted by the land. And at that point, it'd be slightly stronger. And then if we go out to the end of the forecast period, this is by day 5. Again, this is the 12Z run. The ensembles are pretty much, again, split where we could see a storm here or we could see a storm anywhere within this general vicinity. So we could see a storm that goes over the islands or just north of the islands or just south of the islands. Now, the southernmost track over the islands is probably not really going to happen. We can take a look here at the HWRF forecast for this. Again, this is the 12Z run here. On this particular model run here, this basically does something much to the likes here of what some of the other systems like Fred did. Again, much stronger storm here. This is 972 millibars, and again, this probably won't happen. We don't have aircraft data yet, but those will be coming shortly. It passes over here into Cuba and tries to re-intensify there. Again, not really so sure this blows up into a major system. Not really buying it at the moment. The HMON seems to be a little bit more coherent with what it's showing here. Basically, a storm that just moves here and gets shredded by the islands of Hispaniola and the very mountainous terrain. So not really so sure that we're going to have a strong storm in here, but it is possible. Again, the GFS does seem to indicate that it is a plausibility. If you look here at the European ensembles, again, from 60 this morning, again, we had most of kind of the weaker systems that moved over here. And then we had quite a few members that were involved in the stronger kind of camp that moved north of the islands. But even those were very few and far in between. And we have another wave coming off of Africa that we'll have to monitor. Now, real quickly here, this is generated here from Tropical here. And again, what we're really looking at right now is, again, we're looking at the 2021 tropical cyclone kind of tracks basically, and where we're kind of averaging this out from a climatology from 1979 all the way through 2020. This is the ACE index. And again, this kind of red color here is basically the density of increased tropical cyclone tracks. And we can kind of see that there's a pretty big jump here when we start to see with storm tracks that are kind of more so over the island, more so in towards the south here and over Florida, and then kind of another little blob here off the North Atlantic here. And there's a very weak anomaly showing where we have less density turning out to sea like this. Combined with what we're showing here, this is from Eric Webb on Twitter here, Weber Weather. Again, this is basically a really nice chart that he put together but it looks like that we're going to be heading into a phase 3 of the Madden-Julian oscillation, which we can see here again generated by Eric Webb, that we have a density of tropical cyclones that are kind of running through this part of the world right here. And again, this would really favor parts of the Caribbean. And again, this would be something that we're just going to have to watch with time. So there's a lot of uncertainty going forward in terms of our two storms. Again, Fred is likely to remain weak for the next several days, but may find itself in a little bit better environment towards the beginning of next week to intensify slightly. Heavy rainfall and the threat for isolated tornadoes is the biggest threat here for parts of Florida. And then we are also watching newly designated potential tropical cyclone 7, likely soon to be tropical storm Grace. Again, this will be moving also towards the west-northwest and could impact the Lesser Antilles in the next 2 days or so, where we do have some tropical storm watches for portions of the Windward Islands. And again, this too could take a track similar to Fred. All right. With that being said, I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. Of course, I am Michael O'Malley. I'll talk to you guys again some more tomorrow.